The 1244th day of the war, Ilham Aliyev received a gift from a Ukrainian journalist with a chevron of fighters of the Ukrainian armed forces. He did not call the Ukrainians to continue the resistance of Russian aggression. To say that the ass of the Zetniks to fall on Lusk and not to say anything, there is a whole spectrum of emotions. And they are upset that the Russian Federation was abandoned again, and they demand to immediately start a war with Azerbaijan. And they shout about the lost authority in general, complete set. At the same time, the problem with Armenia, it stopped giving out Russian deserters. Another such case ended with the fact that Yerevan did not send an escaped soldier to Russia. Once again, it is amazing the ability of Putin to lose everything and everyone. The Kremlin dictator's mistakes are noticed in the Washington Post, where it is noted that the war itself is a giant mistake of Russia. But on each next turn, Putin only makes the situation worse, already losing influence, the army, and the economy. The channels have recognized the loss of the Kondrativka settlement in the Sun Oblast. Now Russian fabs are flying over it, confirming that there are no more soldiers of Russian armed forces there. The pace of the Russian army's offensive, in the meantime, is falling for the second week in a row and has returned to the May values. It is still too early to talk about the stability of the positive dynamics. It is important where and what, however. Indeed, the pace of promotion has been decreasing for 2 weeks in a row, according to analysts. But the pace of blows is increasing. Ukraine has made the biggest attack on the Moscow region since May, and this again led to the collapse of air traffic, canceled flights, the confusion of airlines, and the closure of airports. In addition, this was achieved by a very small number of drones, but now there are still problems with trains, the movement of which Ukraine also managed to slow down. The tactic shows itself very effectively, and it is difficult to imagine that Kiev will give up on it in the near future. About this and much more in today's fresh report, which you can support with your like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. All these actions help promote the video, especially your subscriptions. They are important for the YouTube algorithms. Based on them, he makes a decision to show the video to different people or not to show it. Therefore, a big thank you to everyone who subscribes and everyone who has already subscribed. Well, we are moving to what happened in the past day. Against the background of new attacks in Moscow and the region, a collapse occurred in the airport with Klaus again. Races were cancelled and moved. The passengers did not know what to do. This was the situation in the airport of Sheremetyevo. The Moscow airport of Sheremetyevo, Vnukovo, and Domodedovo stopped their work twice at night. In the meantime, the air fleet reported that it was forced to adjust the schedule of flights in connection with the initial restrictions in the airport of Sheremetyevo. 134 planes left for the reserve airfields during the restrictions on July 19, said the Russian Air Force. Meanwhile, the restrictions on flights were also introduced at the Kaluga airport. Passengers of the Moscow airport of Sheremetyevo expected their flights to take 12 hours due to the attack of the BPA on the capital of Russia. More than 100 planes left for the reserve airfields. The same situation happens in other air harbors of the Russian Air Force. Passengers claim to be representatives of the air fleet, although what they can do is decidedly unclear. No information. We cannot exchange tickets. I have lost the tickets. Istanbul, Venice, 3 tickets. Now each ticket asks me for an additional $980. The same, what is happening? At least some information should be. I do not see it from 23.3, all tickets. Here everyone comes back, but in the end there should be some respect. I have a golden Aeroflot map, 20, how many there? 23 years. I use your company. What is this at all? For the first time I have faced such an attack. In general, the attack on Moscow and the region on the night of the 19th to the 20th was the largest since the beginning of May, the agency notes from the building. Over the Moscow region, the Russian Air Force shot down 19 UAVs that flew to Moscow, said Mayor Sergei Sobyanin. The last time such a number of drones, according to the statement of the Russian authorities, attacked the capital region on the night of May 6. The Ministry of Defense in the morning of Sunday reported the destruction of 93 Ukrainian UAVs over the internationally recognized regions of Russia and the Black Sea, from 23.3 to 7 o'clock Moscow time. According to the Ministry of Defense, 19 UAVs were shot down over the Moscow region, 16 of which flew to Moscow. The Telegram channel, which is associated with the Telegram channel, published a video on which 2 cars in Zelnograd were seen burning, on which, according to the publication, the debris of drones fell. The Telegram channel Baza also published footage on which a hit UAV crashes into one of the upper floors of the house in Zelnograd. In the airports of Domodedovo, Sheremetyevo, Vnukovo, and Zhukskoy, there were restrictions on flights and landing of aircraft. Also, restrictions were imposed in the airports of Yaroslavl, Nizhny Novgorod, Nikolug, as I have already said, and it must be said that this tactic is incredibly effective. As we remember, during the previous collapse, the loss of Russian companies and transporters amounted to 2 billion rubles, which must be taken from somewhere. Moreover, of course, Western countries, well, well, not Western countries, but countries that still fly to Russia, they also look at all this, because each cancelled, each transferred flight is all additional costs and risks. Because everyone remembers what happened with the Azerbaijani plane, the Azal that flew over Chechnya, and what is happening on this occasion now. Therefore, of course, the more such attacks there will be, the less air traffic will be in Russia, in principle, and moreover, over Moscow, which is, on the one hand, one of the most important Russian hubs, and on the other hand, incredibly close to Ukraine. And accordingly, Ukraine has a lot of opportunities to just launch tens of drones to the side of Moscow to completely paralyze air traffic there. And tactics are useful because they undermine Russian logistics, undermine Russian opportunities in order to coordinate their own actions, and this all leads to large-scale losses. Not to mention the fact that people understand a little that there is a war, and that the war is simply turned into their own inconvenience. And thank God no one dies, but nevertheless there is an inconvenience. And what is an inconvenience for the population? Does this mean that the population is increasingly thinking about the price of this war and what is happening? No, people who are late for a trip to Istanbul or somewhere else will not arrange a revolution in Russia. But the authorities, of course, make decisions, especially under the conditions of international pressure, when everyone from, I don't know, Xi Jinping to Trump says that they want a truce in Ukraine. The authorities will also pay attention to what people think. Because what people think does not affect, I don't know, the revolution, but it affects how much they are ready to work in this system, how much they are ready not to leave if they have such opportunities, especially when it comes to specialists who are important both for the economy and, in principle, for the existence of the state. Therefore, of course, altogether this pressure, it folds into the fact that the positions of Ukraine are improving, the positions of Russia are deteriorating, and therefore, most likely, these attacks will continue, as I told you just in May. When there were these attacks that led to a collapse in air traffic, it's not easy with trains either. In the Rostov region, a towed substation of the North Caucasus Railway was hit. Russian media reported a lot about the delay of trains on the railway in the Rostov region due to the alleged fall of shrapnel in the route, according to the RZD. On the morning of July 20, 132 trains were delayed, of which 20 were in the annexed Crimea and from the Crimea. However, it was really not a fall of debris, but a direct hit by the drone. A towed substation of the North Caucasus Railway was hit. Zamchalova reports to the subscribers of the Krymsky Vetter channel. She said that the fire was seen by NASA satellites. A monitoring group of the Krymsky Vetter reports with a link to the satellite footage. Sooner or later the work will be resumed under the station. It is most likely not worth it, they write. We will have to switch from electric cars to thermal cars. But this is a strong run-up forward, in my opinion, however. The hits on railways and attack paralyzing air traffic are what act incredibly effectively for the destruction of Russian logistics and the increase in fuel consumption. The forces for this, as it turns out, are not very significant, so the tactics are quite effective and will certainly continue. But as you know, Zatniks are specific people, so in such conditions they blame not only Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles, especially not Vladimir Putin, who started this war, and in fact, the actions of Vladimir Putin led to the fact that drones fly over Russia and hit certain objects, and they are scolding people who want to go to Turkey. The Zetfazir collector Ivan Filipov collected posts of new war bloggers, saying that the wrong people got it again, who do not want to help the military and live as if Ukraine has no desire to destroy it. When not all of them are involved in Putin's desire to capture the neighboring state, the Zetfazir authors do not really understand. It is interesting to observe the behavior of some citizens who are now sitting in the airports of Moscow and Istanbul due to the delay of flights due to the cart regime in the airports of Moscow. Some live in their world and do not notice the war. It would be good to mobilize them. Others are bringing their money to Turkey, to those who sponsor and supply weapons to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they do not really hide this, complaining about the missing 13th for some time. Instead of noticing what is happening literally under the nose, instead of helping our army to register as volunteers, to engage in volunteer activity, they sit in the airports and look at the fire float employees and say that, you see, they did not arrive in Turkey in time or anywhere else in order to warm their ass on the foreign beach. Think about it, writes the 13th, while someone dies and spills blood, others have a feast during the plague and are also dissatisfied with something. That's when all the dissatisfied are immersed in what is happening and will understand that in order for less drones to fly to Moscow, it is necessary for the whole country to rise up against the enemy. And while the majority is eating and others are putting their lives on the line while all this is happening, do not wait for the good. Understand this at the end of this 13. I would recommend, on the one hand, to understand that people are not at all obliged to let Vladimir Putin destroy the neighboring country and implemented their complexes related to either small members or something else. No one should die, no one should go to the Russian army to warm their asses in Turkey. Much better than this ass is shelled by an FPV drone on the front line because Vladimir Putin wants wants to sit longer in his palace, and he has a desire to destroy the neighboring country. This war on the Russian side has no motivation at all. They have not come up with a reason for this for all 3.5 years. And they can't, because there is not a single reasonable explanation why Russia should destroy Ukraine. They say that they are going to save the Russian world, but the so-called Russian world, what they call the Russian world, lies in ruins. Donetsk, which was one of the most prosperous cities in Ukraine, is now getting water every 3 days. People beep in bags and throw it out of the windows. Kharkov is bombed. Many cities that Russia has captured are torn to shreds by Russian aviation. What kind of Russian world are they saving? What kind of Russia are they defending if, as a result of this war, Russia has beep its Soviet reserves, beep its fleet? Even if we consider as spectators that Russia must be militarized, well, this militarization is beep. Russian status of the Second World Army is lowered to the toilet because everyone believed the word, and when the matter came to the matter, it turned out that it was not so at all. Therefore, there is not a single reason why Russia is fighting, even if we imagine there are evil reasons. Like new territories are needed. Why bother with your own? Go and break them down. What's in the beep? Industry is now in the beep. The economy is now in the beep. There is not a single reason. Therefore, yes, any person who wants to fly to Turkey, warm their ass there, is a much better and greater patriot of Russia than any person who carries this ass into the trench in order to fight for Vladimir Putin and his ambitions. But the paratrooper's diary also does not guess. I just don't guess, he writes, from the fact that a large enough number of citizens of our country are now traveling to Turkey on vacation. How do you have enough conscience to sponsor through Turkey and the enemy? It is not necessary to say that the government does not carry out a tough policy in relation to this country, that we have a trade financial relationship with them. And where is your personal responsibility, conscience in the end? Don't you really have a sense of dignity and respect for the nation? Is it really more important to get drunk on all-inclusive? And taking a tent and going to the river or to the sea with friends and a guitar? No, and we have a lot of interesting and beautiful places in our country. And then you sincerely wonder why the enemy's drones fly so far. You can think that this is your merit. Hardly yes. But it's on fire. We are standing here protecting the country and you allow yourself to indirectly replenish the budget of non-friendly countries. Shahed. What are the interests of the country in Makivka, in Avdiivka, and anywhere else? There are no interests of Russia there. There are only interests of Putin. But however, I have already said all this. And about the guitar, too, is interesting because the Russian vacation, well, the vacation of Russia itself is now incredibly expensive. And the beaches were beep up by Mazut, for example, in the same Anapa. Well, it's still cheaper to fly to Turkey than to travel to Karelia for a vacation. So yes, let's continue to destroy and militarize the economy. For sure, then everything will immediately get better. Isn't that right? The paratrooper's diary. Oh, come on, he still won't understand. Therefore, well, his ass. Ukrainian journalists gave the president of Azerbaijan a chevron of Ukrainian brigades which defend Ukraine from the occupiers. The chevron was passed on to Lena Kurbanova. By the way, I am still waiting for her appearance in the game of Mark Fajan. Our army, she said, is the only guarantee of security for Ukraine. The most valuable thing we have, she said. Ilham Aliyev thanked for the gift and advised to continue as well. I need to say that there are about half of these chevrons. It is necessary to help other brigades and also collect the other half, but in general, a normal gesture. And well, let's be honest. It is clear that Aliyev, as it were, all these things and in general, these conferences and what he claims he does, including testing. Well, how testing? Directly putting, let's say, on Russia, showing that Azerbaijan is no longer dependent on Russia, that more precisely they are equal partners, that Azerbaijan does not consider Russia a king and a god, does not consider Putin its leader, and so on. And Russia cannot do anything about it. And because of this, the Russian Z community, especially against the background of Aliyev's recent speeches, predictably exploded from behind without any FPV drones. For example, Yuri Podolyako offers to fight with Baku and writes, "The state of Azerbaijan is not only a friendly country for Russia today, but also a geopolitical enemy. And if this is understood and accepted, then everything will immediately become simple and clear what and how to do. It's time for our Ministry of Foreign Affairs to step aside and give the cards in the hands of our Ministry of Internal Affairs for a start. And then, if the Ministry of Defense needs it, then this language, as well as the language of 220 and 100 years ago, the current Azerbaijani Khans will understand. Moreover, they will understand very quickly, and now they will be persuaded only by the world to laugh." Well, the world is really laughing, and not only the rest of the world, but also in Russia, because it is absolutely humiliating how Russia is being brought to the north by the postal service of countries that were previously considered to be the most dependent on Russia. Well, as for the fact that Yuri Podolyak is going to fight, well, let him first go to Donbass to fight, and then, what is it called, we'll see. Alexei Zhivov is going to fight, in fact. Well, how is he going to do it? He will be advertising the Finns as well as Podolyak and write threatening posts. It is difficult to meet a fighting propagandist in nature, but when you call on to start a war, you will always meet with excess. This is what he writes. Russia will conduct a 3-day joint military training with Iran in Caspia. Against the background of the openly hostile statements of Azerbaijan, Caspia may soon become another theater of military action. Russia, after the Durmarch of Azerbaijan, is necessary in an urgent order in any way to achieve a change of power in Armenia and establish relations with Georgia. There is no other narrative except for orthodoxy for the presence of the language of the Caucasus, and it cannot be. There is still a lot. We will definitely come back to this in the next videos, probably already today, because, well, there really exploded just everything that could have exploded. Prigozhetnikov from Aliyev looks absolutely distressed, and their helplessness looks even more distressed, in parallel with this myth, which calls for the fact that Nenejnedat is even more distressed. In short, an absolutely amazing situation, and Aliyev really acts in such a way that the Zetniks laugh. At the same time, I do not feel any sympathy for Aliyev. He is also a dictator, a nightmare in his country and an opposition of anyone, and in order to make peace with Vladimir Putin, for some reason he detained just random Russians, they were beaten up, and this does not paint him or his regime at all, rather showing common with the Russian regime, rather than the opposite. Yes, but nevertheless, when he carries the post of Russia, it looks pretty bright, especially in the context of the fact that Russia cannot do anything. Well, that is, well, let's talk about this again. Armenian police, in the meantime, did not allow the Russian military to kidnap a deserter in Yerevan. Well, that is, Armenia has also not given up. 25-year-old Russian Beep Subtin, who served in the rocket troops in the Avanova region, refused to participate in the war and moved to Armenia in 1924 with the help of the Go Forest project. By the way, go to the forest and support and contact the deserters. This is a very important and very good project. I always recommend it and continue to recommend it. Russia announced it on this Saturday as an interstate investigation into the articles on the self-proclaimed leave apart, and in the country it was in the status of illegal. Decided to choose the path of legalization and turned to the local police in Yerevan. After that, he was detained for 72 hours. This is a standard term during which the Russian authorities had to provide material for the criminal case. If the Russian court has already consented to take him under custody, then in Armenia there must be a court that will give him a measure of detention. Instead of this, the Russian military arrived in the field uniform at 2 p.m. on Saturday. The Russian military, talking to each other, said that a military man was sitting here, and now he would go out. It is possible to assume that they came just to take a walk in the Irabuni district with great excitement, said Astria, an expert on the public verdict of Smiknovikov. As a result, after 72 hours on Saturday, we were released and escorted to the Irabuni police department. The man is safe. There is no risk zone now, because Armenia is currently a country that is trying to comply with its own laws and international obligations. We have no examples of when Armenia would give out Russians who are persecuted for politically motivated articles, said Novikova. At the same time, she remembered the kidnapping of Dmitry Strakov. She added that after this incident there was a lightning-fast reaction from the Armenian authorities to Prime Minister Pashinyan. After that, there was no kidnapping and deportation. We were also engaged in the case of Anatoly Chetnin. There were 2 attempts to get him out of Armenia by military ship, but they were blocked, she recalled. And it is true that the way to Munich is to fight both with Azerbaijan and Armenia at the same time. This still needs to be done, and so that both countries carried you on the table. That's how the RF stood on its knees, gaining international weight. European countries have been shuffling as if they were proven to be former allies, who are enemies to each other, as shown by the way they demonstrate their attitude to the great and powerful Russia. In fact, in Washington Post came out a column which underlines the fact that we often discuss, namely, postulates that the war that Russia is leading is an incredible mistake of Putin. And in every new turn of it, he continues to make the worst choices possible. Ukrainian channel Chernol brought the selected fragments. Let's get acquainted with them. While Russian officials represent the decision of Putin to continue the combat actions as a necessary strategic choice, Western analysts consider his refusal to compromise as a strategic mistake, worth colossal money, including in the form of the loss of international authority. Export markets, energy resources, and global allies. The main allies of Russia in the Middle East, Iran and Syria, have been significantly weakened, as well as the Russian Federation is losing its traditional friends in the Caucasus and Central Asia. It shows that the main supplier of weapons for the Russian Federation has now become North Korea. Trump, who was disappointed by Putin's refusal to conclude a pragmatic deal, announced that he would help Ukraine obtain American weapons, which would pay for Europe, and threatened with severe sanctions against Russia and its trade partners if the war did not end until September 2. In fact, due to Putin's unwillingness to conduct flexible negotiations, he lost the trust of one of the key figures of the West, Trump, who had always been kind to him and sympathized with him. Michael Kimmich, an expert on Russia and a professor at the Catholic University of America, says, in short, war is a huge strategic mistake for the Russian Federation. This is not the war that Russia can win in the long-term perspective. The costs on it are incredible. We're talking about 1 million dead and wounded by the end of this calendar year, and in my opinion, the war objectively worsens the geopolitical situation. The Russian says so. Meanwhile, the publication notes, relationships relationships with important neighbors, including Kazakhstan, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, have deteriorated. Armenia announced the intention of going out of the DKB under the leadership of the mayor, and Azerbaijan is angry that Putin refused to take responsibility after the Russian military shot down an Azerbaijani civilian plane in the Russian airspace in December, killing 38 people. So, taking care, in quotes, of Ukraine, the Russian Federation lost its closest Middle Eastern allies, Syria and Iran. In search of partners and influence, Putin sought to establish ties with the countries of the global south, but due to the influence of the West, many of the United States turned away from the Russian Federation. The economy is in a difficult position. The war made the Russian economy deeply dependent on China. In 1921, before the war, Russia exported 49% of oil and 74% of gas to Europe. But at the beginning of the war, the import was catastrophically reduced. So now Russia sells most of the energy resources with big discounts to China and India. The latter will most likely refuse purchases. In general, the estimates of Western analysts coincide with the conclusions that we come to, but I know that probably the trust in the large Western media is greater, so I bring you their analysis. We check the clock, so to speak, and they clearly show the same time. The time for Putin to shoot down and stop destroying Ukraine and Russia. Before we move on, let me remind you that you can support this channel not only by liking, commenting, and subscribing, which is a huge thank you, but also financially. You can do this on Patreon, the link to which is in the description. And by Fan VPN, this is a means to bypass blockages, which allows you to bypass blockages, watch YouTube at normal speed, use Twitter, Instagram, go to blocked media in general, use the internet normally. You can buy it by the link in the description. And accordingly, this way you will support this channel, use VPN and buy VPN still legally in Russia, and even in the new amendments that everyone is discussing very vigorously. Nothing is said about VPN prohibitions, so use a great VPN and support this channel. Well, we move on. The war bloggers are not lucky not only with the people, but also with the army. They also have a lot of complaints about them. The war blogger channel Millionaire 2 Mayors complains and writes the following. The supply of advanced parts, not to mention the steel warehouses, equipment, radio stations, drones, means of wrap and other important means, in many ways, continues to depend on the help of the people and the work of volunteers. But in the 4th year of the war, it was not possible to create an adequate system of requests and deliveries of the same ones spent in the fights of drones, although it seems that the money from the Ministry of Defense is enough. The rear services simply do not have time to process the requests and quickly deliver the equipment to those units that need it most. Although everything is on paper, it is simply not specified where exactly and when it will be delivered to the front. The military unit can be large, and the presence of PPD in the district of the same drones, or at least shotguns from them. According to the notorious norm, the position is often given the average temperature in the hospital, and not the presence of Mavics in the assault units. Among other things, that's why in the year of feedback, the volunteers were overwhelmed with requests from the frontiers that in the conditions of the offensive they acquired the scale of the 7th shaft. Traditionally, beautiful reports are submitted to The Verge. The forecast of the development of the situation looks like we are fighting because we are fighting. Despite the objectively lasting months of the offensive and the correct eating of the elephant in parts, the main hope is to exterminate the enemy. Thus, the hat for the Chinese mood, 2 Mayors write, is based on the real success of the Russian army. At the front, the re-race is ahead of the real development of the situation. The overcrowding of the old approaches to the organization and military control, in part of the same supply, prevents the front line from supplying the necessary equipment, although the quality of supply has increased dramatically and qualitatively since the beginning of the war. The problem of beautiful reports will apparently not be eradicated until there is no criminal responsibility for the intention of involving the officials of the main units of the Federal Ministry of Investigation. On the other hand, management agencies often take beautiful reports with more care than documents about the threat of security. In the event of an approach, everything is fine. A beautiful marquise, the higher rank of the composition looks more beautiful at the meetings in comparison with the same disassemblies on the establishment of the reasons for the last year's invasion of the VSU in the Kursk region, 2 Mayors conclude. What about the Russian offensive, by the way? Russia has reduced the tempo of the occupation of the territory of Ukraine to a minimum from the middle of May, the agency writes. We have already discussed that such indicators as the weekly pace of the offensive make sense to look at the dynamics, since too many factors affect the situation at the moment. However, the pace is decreasing for the 2nd week in a row. Therefore, this becomes remarkable, but let's see what the agency has calculated. In less than a week, the Russian military captured 72 square kilometers of territory in Ukraine. This is done by the analysis by the Agency of the Data of the Close Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and the Deep State Project. The last time the Russian army captured less than 100 square kilometers per week was in the middle of May. Most of the Russian military in less than a week captured in the vicinity of Pokrovskoe, where 28 square kilometers passed under their control. Other 20, the Russian army occupied the south, where the Russian offensive from the Great Novosil continues. To the east of Konstantinovka, under the control of Russia, 9 square kilometers passed in the area of the Milovoy village in the north of the Kharkiv region of the 7, in the north of the Sumsky region 6, in the Volchansk region, a little less than 6. Speed of the Russian army's advance in Ukraine began to decrease last week, when 158 square kilometers passed under the control of Moscow in the Ukrainian territory in a week. That's 1.5 times less than a week earlier, 225. During this week, the pace of capture of the territory fell even twice, writes the agency. For the last time, the Russian military captured less than 100 square kilometers per week for a week from 12 to 18 May, when 68 square kilometers passed under their control. After that, the Russian army gradually returned to the autumn pace of progress in Ukraine. Again, there is no point in making far-reaching conclusions. Relaxing is still tough on the front, and there are still threats in the South Donetsk direction, in the Bakrovsk direction, in the Kupiansk direction. In short, they still exist, but there is some tendency to decrease the pace of progress. But maybe it just happens, when there are a lot of active fights, and then some kind of pocket is created or something like that, from which a large number of SSU soldiers come out at once, and accordingly, a large territory is immediately painted there relative to this war. A large territory, because even if there's even this approach of 225 square kilometers per week, it is still a penny, according to the standards of the current war and the territory that we are talking about. But nevertheless, the trend has been noted. We will follow its development and see what will happen in principle at the end of July and how much Russia has captured for July. At the same time, the graph from the ascent of the researcher Cyrus shows visually recorded Russian losses of tanks per month. Already the third month of losses of Russian tanks is kept at an extremely low level and continues to fall further. All this happens right in the span of the new wave of the Russian offensive, in which they act practically exclusively infantry and light vehicles. What does this mean in practice? That Russia is losing an incredible number of people in the offensive. The technique is needed to transport, cover fire, and perform tasks to break through. Without it, human losses will increase dramatically, which we, in fact, observe in the online mode. Apparently, the Russian army really wants to help the new leader of the armed forces of the Adar system to achieve his KPI for the destruction of the occupiers. Well, and also traditionally, I will add that the production of equipment in Russia, as well as the establishment of the Soviet Union, has not stopped. Therefore, its use in the current offensive leads to different thoughts, both on the fact that it can be prepared to attempt a mechanized breakthrough on one of the fronts, and on the fact that it can be accumulated to attempt an attack on any country in Europe, and specifically on some country in the Baltic. Or maybe they just want there to be at least something in the warehouses in case Russia has to defend itself. The devil will sort them out. After almost a week, the Russian Z channels have confirmed the obvious. The VSRF left Kondrativka, or Kondrativka, I still don't remember how it hits, or rather the VSU knocked them out of the settlement of the Sumskaya Oblast. Thus, the Ukrainian forces not only take counterattacking actions, but also achieve success in liberating entire settlements of Sumchina. The Belarusian SILAVIK reports, unfortunately, the VSRF left Kondrativka or Kondrativka of the Sumskaya Oblast. For a long time, the VSU has stuck in the defense of the VSRF in that direction, including with the help of maneuvers from the flanks. Now in the settlement, there are still small forces of the Russian army, but at the moment the control is already completely for the VSU. Mayor also published the footage of the work of the VKSRF by the forces of the VSU in that very Kondrativka. Strikes are made on the outskirts of the village, which also confirms the control of the rest of the forces of the VSU. Russian experts are very dissatisfied with the fact that the Ukrainians are reproducing the successful development of the RRF. Earlier we saw how Kiev reinvented its Shahed, and now the same thing happened with the Lancets. And the reporter Filatov complains that the reverse inside the drone has nothing to hide. Here's what he writes. We were very happy for a long time how successfully the Lancets work, almost like a victory weapon. But did they think about what to do when the Ukrainian analog appears? I will not put the video yet. It is written that they will fly very actively, and we are not doing very well with the measures of counteraction. Or rather, not at all, and judging by how the Ukrainians choose their goals, they again outplay us in management. Their analogs fly for such a goal that we would not have approved, he writes. Well, let's hope that everything is as it is. Good luck to the Ukrainian Lancet. Russian military analyst Gal Levin noted that the TV channel Zvezda Minimorona RF demonstrates the line of production of poplars such as Shahed. It is unlikely to scare with the goal, plus he suggests that he will fray. Levin shares his thoughts on this matter. The Russians, like any other complex damage, always like to whip out all the big-scale monstrosno. At the same time, this is a completely legitimate military goal. When such enterprises will take off, the Russians will not have to cry over the killed boys and girls who collect these drones. Helicopter type Shahed is used by the Russians as a weapon of terror. A terrorist is not only the one who actually strikes, but also a scorer. And the one who prepares the terrorist, his weapon is also a terrorist. Moreover, strikes on scouts and organizers are more desirable than strikes on ordinary terrorists. Russians not only sign that they are carrying out a targeted terror against the peaceful civilian population, but also publicly cover up this with their own. They publicly highlight that this is what they are all doing here. The creation of one bloody circle at all levels, from the top of the Kremlin to the boys and girls who screw them up, writes Galevin. In general, I would formulate a bit of ours, not so national, but in fact it is. Alabuga is a monstrously terrorist conveyor where the murder of civilians in the cities of Ukraine is attracted to work, including teenagers. And when a blow is made to this object, a whistle is raised that, look, they beat boys and girls. There's no point in addressing Russian generals and, moreover, MPs officials more precisely to them, to this audience. Therefore, I appeal to bloggers and their audience, especially non-political ones, do not allow the advertising of this military object, even if you have the TZ written that this is a university or some crap is usually written there, even if they offer good money. Advertising Alabuga has nothing to do with advertising the same service of the Russian armed forces, the blood of Ukrainian citizens, and the team of teenagers who will go after your advertisement to collect Shaheds, and on your hands too. Does anyone really think, especially after the web operation, that Ukraine will not solve the problem of Alabuga, the largest production of the most successful Russian weapons for strikes on the cities of Ukraine? Of course it will be. This is a matter of time. Actually, this is what the German Major Christian Freuden, who is one of the main speaking analysts from the Bundeswehr for the war in Ukraine, says about it. Officially, his position sounds like the head of the Situational Center in Ukraine. In the Bundeswehr podcast, Nagerfrak, I don't know German at all, sorry, he noted that Moscow strives to reach a state where it can launch 2,000 UAVs in Ukraine at once. He stated that it makes no sense to knock down a Shahed drone, which costs from 30,000 to 50,000 euros per unit, a Patriot rocket worth more than 5 million euros, and the necessary funds are worth from 2,000 to 4,000 euros per unit. But even the best method of countering this Russian terror of drone attacks, General Major Freuden called reversible deep blows to the Russian bases, military airfields, planes, defense enterprises, and factories. And he is certainly right, and this will clearly be done. Well, at the end of the day, another Russian military complains about extortion and shabby relations. At the same time, he emphasizes that they were extorted all the time, but now they are talking about the beast. The Russian military is extortioning its servicemen in order not to be sent to fulfill the task of God. I am on my second year, and I understand the essence of the situation. But during all this time, there have been no such corrupt actions, such bastards. Victor serves in the assault company V of the 26th Tank Regiment, Part 52562. In November 1924, he received a serious injury, a gunshot wound to the right forearm with the rupture of the elbow bone. 2 operations turned out to be unsuccessful. The bone did not grow, the hand does not function at all, the fingers do not move. The military officer was sent to the hospital, where the doctors reported that the necessary operation was not carried out there. As a result, the soldier voluntarily left the hospital and turned to a private clinic. For this, the command threatened him with a criminal case. An attempt to figure out the situation turned out to be a detention of the military police right at the station. For several days, he was held in a pit at the temporary location of the unit in the town of Novchvanya in the Lugansk region without communication and the ability to inform his relatives. Now, despite the presence of medical documents confirming the weight of the wound, the absence of a conclusion in the VVK, and a complete disability to the service, the soldier is preparing to be sent on a combat mission. According to Victor, he is physically unable to even hold a machine gun. Command, according to the soldier, directly stated, if you want to stay in the rear, pay. The price of such a term is 300,000 rubles. My right hand doesn't work, my fingers don't work at all. I need to go to the category of 7 years of age. They just don't take me to the military police. They send me today. Today is the 17th, 7th, 25th year. They either pay, they gave me the last day today, or send me to fulfill their tasks. According to Victor, the unit has a requirement scheme. For the money, the fighters are not sent to the front line. All this happens with the commanding department. In the requirements, the deputy commander of the company with the call Semak participates in its approval. He, in turn, is covered by the deputy political officer of the regiment with the call Lisa. The whole company is assigned before the election to pay or go on strike. The last group of 16 people, according to Victor, has left and has not returned. So, in the open, no one has ever collected this money for almost a year and a half. This is the situation. You explain to him that you are doing this and that you are not ready to go on a combat mission. If you don't want to go on a combat mission, go ahead. According to the soldier, the military police knows about what is happening, but they can't help with anything. The command is covered from above. The corruption scheme is governed by the commander of the unit with the nickname Bakel and the head of the headquarters Aksay. According to him, it is they who are engaged in the use of the personal component. They go on a combat mission and people just don't come back from there. It's a shame in our army that in our army there are such scum. Yerevan has all the documents about injuries, the category of disability, the need to go to the army hospital, and even a psychiatric conclusion, confirming that he cannot go to the service, but no instance reacts, and the appeal to the prosecutor's office does not bring any results. The military officer reported that the problem is systemic in nature. According to him, many fighters cannot declare what is happening because they simply do not give them such an opportunity. At the arrival of those who check the commandment, they hide their personal composition and report that they are allegedly on a combat mission. Relationships as an article, that is, everything is built on corruption, and unfortunately, this is what many people see, but upon arrival of some kind of check, many people remain silent. And who can say that everyone already knows, hides, or sends them to fulfill combat tasks? In fact, the classic story of the Russian army is amazing, and patience, and in fact, the lack of understanding of the soldier that this is a part of everything. And think about it, it seems to me that this is also an interesting detail. We are not talking about a fine, we are talking about the fact that sending to an assault is equal to punishment. Any assault in any part of the assault is equal to death, that is, they punish with assaults. In a normal army, assaults are a difficult task, of course, but somewhere even honorable. This is part of the combat service. Here, assaults are something where you can't go under any circumstances, so much so that the entire scheme of assistance is done through assaults. But why is the commandment of all this like this? Because only by abandoning the soldiers to an absolutely nothing state, although there are quite nothing people in their moral qualities, but only by abandoning them to an absolute scum. As the Russian military rightly notes, you can do with them anything you want, and in fact, Russia is worth it. Not a single normal military man would agree to go to any assault if there is no equipment, no normal commander, no normal plan. But the Russian military is coming, because he is afraid of holes, he is afraid of zeroing, he is ready to pay, he is ready to be humiliated, to stand on his knees and do anything else. He does not fight not only for his rights, he does not even fight against what he considers unfair, even when he has an assault rifle in his hands. This is the Russian army. This is the Russian soldiers and officers right here and now. If you are in this army and you lack the courage to fight these people just by shooting them down to the dogs, then run, run without looking, run through these forests, surrender to captivity. You will not survive, you will not remain well with a full set of limbs. And in Russia, it's just an abomination, not a life. Nothing is created there for people who have no limbs, who are colleagues, who are disabled, and so on. So run where your eyes are looking, and if you don't get into the Russian army and think about the fact that you are there, you will digest this thought from yourself. And if you have relatives with such a thought, you will digest this thought from them. You will not only become murderers, occupiers, and fascists, but you will most likely die right there. And then you will be buried in a grave covered with beep, which I talked about in previous reports. Well, Michael Nacke was with you, and see you soon. All the best. Bye.